Houston. We're ready for the event.
And Kansas Cosmosphere, this is Mission Control Houston. Please call station for a voice check.
Electric and Manufacturing Company in East Pittsburgh.
British wireless station to receive American voice. From over 3,000 miles of land and ocean, words spoken in America are heard by Captain West of the British Broadcasting Corporation. And then messages relayed to all...
Crude-looking instrument, but one that was destined to develop the modern miracles of radio. Marconi amazed the world by sending and receiving wireless messages 3,000 miles across the Atlantic. Since its invention, wireless has saved numberless ships and human lives from ocean disasters. Mankind can never forget it.
On the evening of April 14, 1912, Marconi telegraphist Harold Cottam shrugged off his coat and sank down into the chair in front of his wireless apparatus that he operated, and began to unlace his boots in preparation for retiring for the night. He had just returned from reporting to the bridge of the Carpathia concerning the daily wireless communications. Despite being off duty in the technical sense, his wireless remained over his ears, allowing him to continue listening in for confirmation on messages he had sent to the SS Parisian earlier in the afternoon, while he prepared for bed. The Massachusetts Cape Cod wireless station, announcing private correspondence for the passengers of the Titanic, caught Cottam's attention. He was well aware that his fellow Marconi Company radio operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride were under a great deal of pressure, working diligently to catch up with a backlog of communications which had amassed when their wireless machine had suddenly required repairs the day before. Still awaiting a response from the Parisian, Cottam sat back down at his instrument and began transcribing messages meant for the luxury liner, in the hopes of relaying them the next morning. When no response to Cape Cod from the Titanic was forthcoming, Cottam placed a call himself to the Titanic and asked them if they were aware that Cape Cod was sending batches of messages to them. The reply from Jack Phillips, senior officer working for the Titanic Wireless, seemed at first improbable to Cottam. It read, "Come at once. It is a distress message. CQD." The Marconi Company had designated the Morse code CQD in 1904 as its distress signal. It had retained the landline telegraph missive of CQ, which had long represented an all stations alert, but had added the D at the end to denote distress for maritime radio operators, and despite the SOS signal having been internationally adopted in 1908, CQD was still most often used by Marconi wireless radio telegraphers at sea. Cottam responded to this message with a question of confirmation. "Should I take this to the captain?" "Yes," was the singular and chilling response, tapped with a steady hand by Phillips. Cottam wasted no time getting to the bridge, where the first and second officer were on duty, having taken the night watch from Captain Rostron, who had already retired. When the officers on duty were not able to be convinced quickly enough of the urgency of the situation, Cottam proceeded to awaken the captain in his cabin, who immediately gave the order to turn the ship around after being assured by Cottam that he was certain the signal was one of distress and that it required immediate assistance. At the request of the captain, Cottam sent the Carpathia's position, receiving in return a simple "received." 4 minutes went by before Cottam reached out again to the distressed ship, confirming both the Carpathia's and the Titanic's positions. A simple, "all right," was the response. Again, several minutes passed before a call was made to the beleaguered ocean liner from the German ship the Frankfurt, followed by a call from the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic. When no response was given, Cottam reached out to Phillips once more, asking if he was aware that the Olympic was calling. The response was that he was not aware of it and could not read him above the escaping steam and rushing air. Several more minutes passed, and Cottam told the Titanic to call the Baltic. The message was unsatisfactory. The Carpathia, now steaming along towards the damaged ship, had, at the command of the captain, doubled their stokers and watches as they traversed the treacherous ice-filled waters in darkness, attempting to reach the foundering ship in time to offer her assistance. In the radio room, Cottam overheard another message sent from Phillips to the Baltic. "Steady but urgent. Come at once, we are head down," followed by the coordinates of the fast-sinking ship. Cottam continued to communicate with the Titanic and other ships and stations until a chilling missive, sent by Phillips, simply read, "Come quick, our engine room is filling up to the boilers." And then there was silence. Captain Rostron urgently dictated a message to Cottam informing the Titanic of their position, assuring them that they were coming fast with a double watch on their engine room and to be prepared with the lifeboats. But no acknowledgement was received. The last message from the Titanic had been sent, and the Carpathia would arrive to find the great ship had slipped beneath the icy waters, with barely a ripple to show where it had been, leaving 710 of the approximately 2,240 passengers and crew to be pulled on board from the lifeboats, only half full, hours later. On board the Titanic in those final moments, senior radio telegrapher Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, his secondary, were relieved of their duty by Captain Smith and told to head for the lifeboats. However, Phillips continued to work the machine up to the last minute in a desperate attempt to attain the various ships' coordinates to convey to the lifeboats before racing up to the deck. Harold Bride managed to reach an overturned lifeboat on which he and 30 other people balanced until they were rescued and brought aboard the Carpathia, from which he began sending messages for survivors, though communication of the events of that night were largely withheld until the Carpathia arrived in New York. Jack Phillips was witnessed to have entered a lifeboat as well, but was not among the survivors. The 1909 Nobel Prize winner in physics Guglielmo Marconi, largely recognized as the inventor of wireless radiotelegraphy and chairman of the Marconi Company, whose wireless apparatuses were used in the majority of ships and land stations, was called to testify before the Senate committee investigation regarding the sinking of the Titanic. Marconi and his family had themselves narrowly avoided being on the Titanic's maiden voyage, having been offered the trip to New York compliments of the White Star Line. Marconi had turned them down due to his workload, which required a stenographer. His personal stenographer was prone to becoming seasick and was not able to make the trip, prompting Marconi, who knew the stenographer of the Lusitania to be extremely capable, to make the fortuitous decision to take the journey to New York on board that storage ship instead. Marconi's wife, excited to be invited on board the first voyage of the new luxury liner Titanic, was also thwarted at the last minute from making the journey when their son became ill and required that the two stay behind in England. Marconi, already in New York upon the arrival of the Carpathia, was first aboard the vessel carrying the surviving passengers of the Titanic, where he spoke to his wireless operators concerning the disaster. In his testimony before Congress, he confirmed trouble with messages being sent and received over the course of the days between the sinking of the Titanic and the Carpathia's arrival in New York. The workload of sending messages to family from survivors was estimated to be upwards of 500 messages which were sent from the Carpathia and acknowledged by land stations. So exhausted were Cottam and Bride that both admitted to falling asleep at the apparatus several times during their day and night vigil. Many of the messages were sent through the Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, as it had the most powerful apparatus available at the time, which extended its reach. In the congressional committee headed by Senator William Alden Smith of Michigan, the subject of the rights of privacy of the individual, where wireless correspondence was concerned, came into question, as the United States had not yet joined the European countries in outlining and agreeing upon the legal parameters of wireless radio wave usage. However, because the Carpathia was a foreign-owned ship in the international waters at the time in question, the ability for Congress to access the personal telegraphs was limited to what the Marconi Company was able and agreeable to release. It would seem the fight to protect the rights of the individual over the strong hand of government is not new in any way. In his testimony, Marconi affirmed the wisdom of requiring all ships to have operators manning their wireless apparatuses around the clock, as most ships at the time employed a single operator, and he did not usually work through the night. The congressional investigation also shone a light, so to speak, on the importance of regulating and restricting radio wave usage by amateurs, leaving the waves open to maritime communication and placing an emphasis on the distress signaling first and foremost. In the aftermath of the investigation, into that fateful night the Titanic failed to avoid the iceberg responsible for its sinking, Marconi was elevated from celebrated wireless inventor to a heroic figure across the globe, as his wireless was credited for the rescue of those who survived the terrible tragedy of the ship that had been touted as practically unsinkable. The British Postmaster General Herbert Samuel summed it up: "Those who have been saved through one man, Mr. Marconi, and his marvelous inventions." According to the congressional records, throughout the night after the distress call went out from the Titanic, several wireless stations and at least 8 ships were made aware of the disaster and worked to communicate with the Titanic, facilitating help and rescue efforts or communication with others. And in these hours, while every breath was held awaiting news of survivors and the fate of the Titanic, all of which was delivered over invisible waves from the dark side of the light spectrum, the world changed again. Suddenly, and quite unexpectedly, the pursuit and use of wireless communication went from interesting phenomenon to absolutely essential technology in the minds of citizenry and governments everywhere. And a shift was felt worldwide by the scientific community as wireless technology put on its skates and raced into the future, gaining momentum at the speed of light. In the little house, the news of the sinking of the Titanic came as something of a shock. And once the disbelief wore off, the Pixies agreed decidedly the land beneath their feet was preferable to waves, particularly ice-littered waves. Also, they noted that boarding a ship that had been declared to be impossible for even God to sink is not a particularly good idea, as they are well aware that pride often precedes a fall, and a fall at sea is not one easily recovered from. The fact that anyone at all had been rescued, they agreed, was entirely down to the discovery and usage of radio waves, which allowed Marconi to build a wireless communication system that would defy the collective imagination of the time. And in the span of a single lifetime, invisible electromagnetic waves that could carry information at light speed went from theoretical, borderline crazy even, to a proven technology, seemingly in the blink of an eye. Men could suddenly now speak to and view one another using the far end of the light spectrum to realize and exceed even the wildest imaginings of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. For the Pixies, the very idea of not being able to visit with their grandparents over a Zoom call, or having to wait for a letter sent by snail mail to give them a glimpse into their friends' and cousins' lives, or to share their own, is an entirely foreign concept. Although, the arrival of a mysterious handwritten missive, tucked within the yawning recesses of their otherwise useless mailbox by an invisible hand, or snail, and addressed entirely to their persons, is received with a level of delight akin to that I imagine a royal summons to a grand Victorian ball might have been received in Dickens-era households. But alas, this event is as rare as unicorn sightings in the Deep South. The Pixies have never lived in a world where they were untethered from constant radio wave bombardment, for better or for worse. But then, none of us really have, which begs the question, does a fish know it's wet? If all you've ever experienced is a life backstroking through a sea of rippling invisible electromagnetic waves, would you be inclined to recognize the benefits or consequences of inhabiting an environment that did not bathe every cell of your being in manufactured frequencies around the clock? Please don't misunderstand me. There is no doubt that the advancement in technology that started with Newton, as he excitedly observed the separation of visible white light through a prism, discovering a rainbow of energetic and colorful waves, and the later discovery of radio and microwaves, or RFs and EMFs, have brought immeasurable good to humanity. Still, one wonders how much of a good thing is too much. After all, we know that sunlight is good for us, but we are still advised to remove ourselves forthwith from the direct sunlight when we are overheated or in danger of resembling a lobster should we fail to heed the warning signs. We are dramatically draped with lead aprons to avoid damage from excessive X-ray exposure, and urged to avoid too much screen time as it damages our retinas. So, just what is the deal with this end of the light spectrum anyway? The sun is the primary progenitor of the solar electromagnetic radio waves bursting out through the reddish gaseous chromosphere and the corona layers of its atmosphere in wavelengths between 1 millimeter to 10 kilometers. Solar radio waves originate in solar flares and coronal mass ejections known as CMEs, though where in these outbursts is still a mystery to science. These violent events are the drivers of solar weather and solar storms, and according to NASA, when they occur while facing the Earth, they can disrupt the Earth's magnetic field, jostling it and interfering with the man-made radio wave transmissions back on the old terra firma, or even disturb the networks of satellites orbiting our rock. Further away, astronomical bodies such as stars, black holes, galaxies, dust clouds, and even Jupiter emit radio waves like the sun, due to their changing magnetic fields. Black body radiation on Earth, which is emitted by warm objects, also generate electromagnetic energy in the radio wave range, as does lightning. And one particularly curious terrestrial source of these waves is discharge of volcanic energy, resulting in full lightning bolts worthy of an angered Greek deity, generating pulses of radio waves, or the continual high-frequency radio waves which emanate from the base of a volcanic ash plume. As mysterious as they have long seemed, radio waves are simply electromagnetic light waves in the frequency range of 3 kHz to 300 GHz, with microwaves being on the shorter wavelength higher frequency side of the RF EMF or radio frequency electromagnetic spectrum. And though they occur, as previously described, in the natural world, they are also generated through the use of transmitters attached to antennas, allowing us access to everything from high-speed internet and television to radar and household microwaves. The discovery of electromagnetic waves and the ensuing race to understand them, create them, and use them was a process that took surprisingly less time than you might expect, given the complexity of the subject matter and its near impenetrable cloak of invisibility. But as with all scientific leaps, the capability to utilize light waves to transfer information with intentionality was simply awaiting the discovery by the right individual who would be inclined to observe nature from a slightly different angle, allowing a new facet of the spooky side of physics to be revealed and explored, until it eventually would become the reality that the whole world balances on, with barely a memory of a life without it, or a single thought to whether or not the balancing act is a precarious one. The topic of light waves in the radio-microwave end of the spectrum surprised us with a snazzily dressed white rabbit and an unexpected plunge downward that twisted and branched at a dizzying rate. Information, ironically delivered of the very waves we were investigating, was vast. So we've decided to break the radio wave and microwave video into 2 parts, so it can be viewed with less dizzying results for you, the viewer. Please consider joining us for the rest of the story in part 2 of our video series on radio waves and microwaves, when we meet the individuals who brought this invisible part of the light spectrum to the forefront of modern life and find out what, if any, impact the inundation of man-made waves has had on the natural world and on our own physiology. We hope you will consider subscribing to our channel, liking our videos, commenting, and even sharing the videos with your family and friends, as it all helps us as we continue to grow. Thank you for spending a few minutes with us. See you next time.
I do not think that the radio waves I have discovered will have any practical application. Heinrich Holtz.